Okay.
Good evening to all of you. Welcome back to this second part of Rahul's lecture on Immanuel Kant. Today is the 22nd of April. So exactly 300 years ago, Immanuel Kant was born in a small. So this is Rahul Pungaliya yesterday. And today he is going to speak more about Kant's philosophy, particularly his idea of aesthetics. So I'm sure that you will certainly. Rahul, can we start?
Yes, yes, we will.
Sir, please go ahead.
Yeah. So, friends, today what I intend to do is, in a way, kind of summarize what I did yesterday and clarify it as I summarize, uh, and talk about the topic that I
Yeah.
was supposed to talk on, that is the role of art in the age of science and what Kant has to say about arts and beauty. And by arts, he means fine arts, especially the arts which create objects of beauty. So, yesterday I talked about the dilemma that Kant faced. It was the dilemma of skepticism, and the challenge was thrown, gauntlet was thrown by David Hume, and he said that any kind of inductive reasoning, that is, reasoning which uh, is based upon past cases to talk about future events, enumeration of several such cases, like for example, when you see that numerous crows are black, you assume that the next crow that you are going to see will be naturally black. But this induction is always probabilistic, it is never certain. And second thing is, when you have induction about property, it is to a degree justifiable because you infer about future events based on your past experiences. But when uh, your induction is a strong induction about cause and effect, chain cause and effect relation, then the experiences, how much so ever big the corpus of experiences, are not enough, because Hume argued that induction is essentially circular. How is it circular? It is circular because you assume that X will be the case in future, because you have uh, assumed that X will be the case in the past. Now that sounds rather funny use of logic. You would expect one to put it this way, that X was the case in the past. But here you're talking about the statement that you have to prove, and that is that X will be the case in future. And all the past cases, all the past cases were unique, they were different. So they are never going to really be like whatever is going to happen in the future. So, what you are in fact saying by invoking the experiences in the past is that X will be the case in future because X will be the case in the past when it becomes the past. So, your knowledge does not rest on experience, it does not have any verifiability, it doesn't have any certainty. This was kind of puncturing the pride of new sciences, physical sciences. And knowledge basically rests on faith. So, if knowledge rests on faith, then one had to salvage knowledge somewhat. One had to show that there is some apodictic, absolute, objective certainty behind knowledge. And as I told you yesterday, that Kant then gave up the idea of the ready-made world, the world which can itself offer proof of knowledge. Because, as I explained to you yesterday, you cannot go directly to the world which is full of facts and truths to be garnered, to be gathered together, because then uh, in such a world, uh, the role of consciousness would be quite unnecessary. I mean, the world itself would be a kind of, it would be a kind of an objectivist world, as Hegel later imagined there to be. But it would be you cannot access the world directly without without mediating through your consciousness. All knowledge is essentially mediated through your consciousness, and there is no consciousness independent direct access to the ready-made world. The world is filtered through your consciousness. It is in a way constructed by your consciousness. It is constituted by your consciousness. And that's why Kant says that understanding is constitutive. This skepticism was a huge challenge. Then, if the world was, and this is another argument, if world was completely determined by the causal laws, and if the mechanistic worldview, that world operates like a machine, then there is no question of free will. If scientific determination, if scientific laws determine everything that we do, everything that we perceive, everything that happens, and that is what the claim of scientists is, then where is the free will? What freedom do human beings enjoy? Our behavior is determined by our biological or neurological desires, and reason that we use, our pride, our difference from animals, because animals have got claws and teeth, sharp teeth and beaks, and we've got reason to analyze. I mean, just as they would tear apart the things with the help of their strong claws and strong limbs, we tear apart the universe with our reason. Reason is our claws and teeth. So we are no different than animals. Reason is only a means to fulfill our desires. And Kant had to defend both knowledge and freedom, and that's the task he took upon himself. So he effected a Copernican revolution, and shifted the notion of objectivity and certainty inside the subject rather than in the world out there. So this was the task that Kant performed. The problem that he encountered, since there was continental rationalistic tendency in philosophy and British Scottish empiricist philosophy was very much powerful, he realized that science requires both, and both these things are mutually contradictory. Because Empirical observations are always particular, they are changing, and they are contingent. That is, they are not governed by any laws. And whereas mathematical knowledge is a priori, it's analytical and it is unchanging and it has got necessity inscribed in it, like mathematical equations. Like, for example, equations or statements such as, the sum of triangles is equal to 160, and so on and so forth. So, how do sciences which use both, they use mathematical formulae as well as the empirical observations, and they try to predict empirical observations with the help of mathematical formulae, how can they operate? Because there is incompatibility between the observed contingent accidental empirical data and a priori knowledge. So that was another task that Kant had, that was waiting for Kant to address. And then, he came up with a brilliant idea of, and here I'm talking about his first critic, he came up with a brilliant idea of synthetic a priori propositions or judgments. Now, analytical judgments, which are kind of mathematical judgments, like, for example, line is the shortest distance between 2 points and so on and so forth. And the experiential synthetic a posteriori judgments, such as all crows are black, or when the clouds gather, it usually rains. There are some propositions which are synthetic a priori. And what does that mean? That they are absolute, that they are in a way contained within the predicate is contained within the subject of the proposition. The premises already kind of point towards the meaning that is going to be elucidated out of them, and yet they offer a new knowledge. Like, for example, 4 is equal to 2 plus 2 is in a way a new knowledge, though it seems very obvious, because one would say that 4 means 2 plus 2, because 4 can also mean 3 plus 1, and 4 can mean numerous such mathematical entities, like 4 is equal to 2 square and so on and so forth. So this is an example of synthetic a priori statement or synthetic a priori proposition. And there are several such propositions, such as, for example, each effect has to have a cause, or everything happens in space or and time. So whatever the events happen, there are going to be prior events to it and latter events to it. So these are experiential as well as analytical, in the sense they are a priori. So this is a kind of new idea that Kant kind of discovered, and then he said that this kind of understanding that human beings possess is foundational understanding, because it imparts a value of necessity to otherwise contingent data that your experiences offer you. So it kind of gives a kind of an order to your experiences. Like, you see things in sequences. You never see things, if they are connected to each other, the kind of, you never see things haphazardly. there is some order to the events, and certain events always appear to necessitate other events, and so on and so forth. Things happen. I mean, things can't happen without time. That is either the relation of spontaneity, simultaneity, or relation of precedence. These relations do have to accompany all the events, all the things that happen around you, to you, whether you are inside states or your outside experiences. So there has to be always when to things and where to things. And this is provided by human mind. And this understanding is spontaneous. It is not, I mean, understanding in itself is not governed by any physical necessity or natural necessity. It happens out of its own accord. Okay. So on the one hand, there is deterministic nature, and human being as a biological being, as a natural being, is part of that deterministic nature. And on the other hand, human being is spontaneous, is knowledge generating. Now, there is another requirement in epistemology, that you cannot have infinite regress when you want to assert something. So when you want to assert a proposition, then it it cannot be dependent on statements which go way back towards an unending kind of chain of statements. So any necessity, anything that has to happen, is possible on the basis of something which is itself not necessitated. Okay, so you this foundational kind of concepts are provided by human mind. Okay, and like for example, you perceive that things have causes and things have effects, and you also perceive that this causal chain is infinite in a way. I mean, you do not know in a way a kind of the first event which caused the entire event of existence in the world. I mean, which, as it were, was the beginning condition of the world. And you should not make statements about that. Can't realize that you can't talk about an absolute beginning or an absolute infiniteness. But what you can certainly say is that everything that is happening has to have a cause. And that is the foundational kind of a statement. So, in Critique of Pure Reason, what Kant does is he talks about how we arrive at natural laws and what that means for our descriptions of our place in the universe. And our place in the universe is paradoxical, as I told you. On the one hand, we are creatures who are burdened with freedom of will, that we have to make choices, moral choices, existential choices, life choices. And on the other hand, we are, as physical natural beings, we are governed by all the forces of nature that operate upon the entire nature. So, this paradoxical kind of situation of human being is talked about in Critique of Pure Reason. In the second critique, Kant, otherwise he would have been termed a kind of uh, a person who was pessimistic about human freedom and who was anti-religion too, because who would deny the notion of sin and virtue? Because if it is not in your hand to choose the course of action, then how can you be blamed for it? So all bad things that you do, whether violent things or violative things, the cruel things, you can always plead that I was prompted to do so by my desires or by situation itself. Because the idea of human responsibility, idea of sin, depends on human ability to resist the conditions which force you to act in a particular way. And succumbing to it is almost a choice. And that's why you are either virtuous or you are vicious. So Kant had to defend human freedom. Kant had to defend morality. And that's why he wrote second critique, which is called Critique of Practical Reason. And there he talks about how human freedom is possible. So he talks about human beings as not just phenomena, not as something that is given to our receptive faculty, to our senses, but as noumena, as thing in itself, as a person who is unknown to himself. And this is very important. Kind of, Kant's notion of self is a kind of, fragmented or divided notion of self. There are two selves. One is the self, which is part of this chain of uh, life, chain of beings, the great chain of being. And the second is the notion of self, which is outside this chain of beings and which is, in a way, incomprehensible because it wills its way, it creates knowledge, it spontaneously gives laws to the world. And here, spontaneity means a certain prescription of certain order in the world. Now, normally, spontaneity means something indisciplined. I mean, whatever willful behavior. But here, for Kant, spontaneity is not willful behavior, but spontaneity is something that human beings do only as human beings, that they are not forced to do that, and because of which the world becomes cognizable, the world becomes understandable. So, I mean, one has to remember this notion of this meaning of word spontaneity when one talks about romantic aesthetics or romantic poetics, because there the word spontaneous is used and it is many times misunderstood. Spontaneity of romantic poetry, of romantic art, means a total chaos, a total freedom normally. But that is not what the original meaning of spontaneity is. And the third judgment is the third book, which is a critique of judgment that Kant wrote. And three major, I mean, he wrote several other works, but three major critiques that he wrote is how we might connect the realms of natural necessity and epistemology, human knowledge, with the realm of human freedom. And he proposed that it is through the existence of the beautiful, existence of things which possess this particular quality of beauty and our own ability to create beauty in art, that we can, in a way, as it were, humanize nature and naturalize. I mean, I'm using Marxian terminology, naturalize humanity. So the purposiveness, I mean, nature is without purpose. Nature is, in a way, kind of, a blind operation of blind necessity. It does not have any values. It's not. It is amoral. But when you see some kind of goodness, some kind of harmoniousness, some kind of sublimity, some kind of pleasantness in nature, then you feel that nature is almost like you. It is almost spontaneous. It is almost purposeful. That it has got certain uh, desire to communicate with you. And so this is how three critics are organized. Now, as I told you yesterday, that Kant, I mean, it is not out of blue that Kant came up with this idea. This was the kind of, vague ethos that he found himself in. I mean, this was, as it were, the zeitgeist, the spirit of his times. What was the spirit of his times? The spirit of his times was that he lived in a modern world, and modern world, in modernity, human life was divided in three spheres. One was the sphere of natural science, technology, economic activity governed by capitalist industrial production. Another sphere was the sphere of state regulation, law, constitution, morality, responsibility of individual as a citizen, as a person who was equal in front of the law, the person who was alone, was solitary, was individual, and person who had to take the responsibility for his action. So this was the second sphere, sphere of law. And the third was the sphere of art, the sphere of painting, poetry, sculpture, music. I mean, you have to realize that, great composers such as Beethoven and Mozart and Schubert, they were of the same period. Great poetry, literature of Schiller, Goethe, Wordsworth, Coleridge, William Blake was of the same period that Kant was living in. And the great state making activities like French Revolution and formation of British Constitution and the triumph of democratic nation states all over Europe. So all these kind of legal activities, industrial scientific activities, and artistic activities were creating a huge turbulence, and it had to be put into some philosophical shape, and that is what Kant does. Now, there is no point going over most of the things that I talked about, but to acquaint you a little, if you at all you decide to read uh, Kant's critics with the help of perhaps some good secondary material, then I'll give you a kind of synoptic overview, a fast overview of what is there in the first critic, because it is philosophically the most important critic, and most uh, philosophers still up till today engage themselves with Kantian ideas. So, you have even postmodern thinkers such as Foucault and Derrida and Western Marxist thinkers like Adorno, devoting, a huge kind of part of their writing to these things, So, Kant proves that it is we, the senses, unlike what empiricists were insisting, that knowledge happens passively by, objects impress themselves upon our mind. And Kant says that senses do not judge, because the causal impact that things in themselves, noumena or objects out there, that have upon us is not cognitive. It just creates a plethora of sense impressions. And senses only, here Kant distinguishes in, in a way, he kind of, and by the way, you have to remember that this is not a psychological kind of, knowledge that he is producing, but philosophical knowledge. Human faculties of cognition are very emphatically kind of, distinguished by Kant. And he says that the receptive faculty, that of senses, only takes in the sense data, and senses cannot make mistakes because they just take in data. Mistakes occur when we judge what the senses provide us with the help of concepts. Now, when you use concepts, then what you are doing is you are redescribing what is perceived. You are identifying what is perceived as entities. You name them. You see a particular object and you identify that it is this object. Now, that identification can go wrong. Like, for example, you have to distinguish between a dog and a horse. And you have got certain schema, you've got certain pattern in your mind, which is a dog pattern, and another pattern, which is a horse pattern. You compare the object in front of you with 1,000 such patterns in front of you in your mind that are available to you. These are what Kant calls schema. And these kind of judgments of identification, judgments about the world, the cause-effect judgments, or any kind of, judgments about quantity, that is extension of, he talks about 4 kinds of judgments. There are judgments of quantity, judgments of quality, judgments of relation to other things, that is cause, effect, or simultaneity, or many other kind of relations, belonging, and so on and so forth. And the judgments about the ontological status, whether it is something is possible or something is necessary or something is actual. So these relations of quantity, judgments of quantity, quality, relation, and possible are made by human beings spontaneously, and they require certain talent. There is no way that there is a kind of, mechanical, certain method which governs the way you judge things. Okay, so it requires certain talent which is equipped with pure concepts of understanding, forms of thought which cannot be derived from looking at the world, such as oneness, sameness. Yesterday I talked about them. And so knowledge has got 2 sources. One is your inbuilt ways of understanding the world, and here Kant comes up with another faculty. First is senses, second is understanding, third is imagination, and the fourth is reason. Those who are familiar with English literature would remember all these 4 words in Coleridge's Philocracy. Coleridge's, poetics, when he talks about, primary and secondary imagination in Biographia Literaria. So Uh, these human active way of synthesizing the world from experiences is something that human beings can certain about, because first it is inevitable that they understand the world in this way, and that's the only way in which they can understand the world. So these are limitations of understanding. And second is, it is something that is self-evident to them. So the human beings create this synthetic a priori judgments, and it is pure knowledge that can be increased with and without the input from the senses. The necessity, the apodicticness, certainty is added to human experiences by human beings themselves. The same notion of identity, that no object is same as another, etc. So identity, necessity are things, are built-in function of our thoughts. Kant's critique of pure reason is divided in three parts. One is the transcendental aesthetic, and here aesthetic does not mean art, it means sensing world through space and time. Then transcendental logic, the necessary forms of thought, and transcendental dialectic, when concepts are applied beyond human limits. Like, for example, when we talk about the beginning of the world, or the logical uh, outcome of cause effect relationship, because it is beyond our experiences, and it lands you in paralogisms, what Kant says, paralogisms of reason or paradoxes. So Kant's transcendental philosophy, in short, states conditions of knowledge, and this is the way he's, you can call him constructivist. Then he's in a way a kind of also a representationalist, because he, human beings, according to him, represent the knowledge in their own language, as it were. Now, Kant has got something interesting to say about the self which does all this. He calls the self transcendental unity of a perception. This is different than Descartesian cogito. Descartes doubted whether there is self or there isn't. And he said that the proof that I exist, the proof that there is a thinking being, there is rational being, is that this doubt itself is the proof. Because who is doubting this? Kant argues that cogito ergo sum, I doubt therefore I am, this I am does not appear only when you are in doubt. It accompanies all your experiences. So I am is incomplete statement. It is always I am aware of the fact that I'm giving you this lecture. I'm aware that I'm drinking water. I'm aware that I'm tired. I'm aware that I'm walking. So this awareness of me keeps haunting you. Self is the ghost that always accompanies you. You are never left alone without this self. And only because self accompanies you through several experiences, it has to be united. That's where it becomes self. Otherwise, it will be just an accident. Descartes' self is just one of its kind self. Like, for example, I do something in the morning. For example, I watered plants in the morning. Then I have to remember that I have watered the plants in the morning, and it is me talking to you about that self which watered the plant in the morning. And I have to realize that it is the same self. So, self requires one is memory and assurance that I continue through time, that I'm not different beings. The one who watered the plant, the one who went to his child's school, the one who waited on the bus stop, the one who is giving lecture, all these are same selves. It is the same self, and this unity of which is a transcendental unity. Why is it transcendental? Because if this unity is not there, then I cannot cognize anything. It is the same me who saw a stone being thrown, and it is the same me who saw the window being broken. And that's why I can make a statement that the window was broken because of the impact of the thrown stone. So this self unifies, as it were, my knowledge. That's why Kant calls it the transcendental unity of perception. And it is this self which is noumenal, which is not accessible to itself. Because when you reflect on your own self, when there is self reflexivity of the self, and Hegel is going to take it to another level, Marx is going to take it even further. The notion of not just consciousness that empiricists had, but the notion of self consciousness. Consciousness which is aware of itself. And it is this self consciousness which offers you an identity. And it is this self consciousness which is noumenal, which is free, which cannot be law bound, as it were. So it is the absent center, as it were, of which holds together the entire circle. So this is what I mean, in a way, kind of Kant does in Critique of Pure Reason. Now I'll go to his last critique of judgment, where he talks about the art objects, the beauty in nature and beauty in fine arts, and he values it as something which kind of saves humanity from either being totally subject to the natural necessity of its own making, and being completely thrown on its own when it comes to moral choices. So the sense of loneliness that a moral man would necessarily have, and the sense of helplessness that a man who overvalues physical sciences, the respite is provided by the aesthetic sphere, by the sphere of arts. And now let's go to what Kant has to say about that. Immanuel Kant, in a way, established the terms which aesthetics, which is a branch of philosophy, uses. I mean, these terms were there around him in philosophical parlance, but he his interpretations of those terms, his use of those terms, dominated aesthetics or philosophy of arts for last 200 and more years. One such term is beautiful, another is taste, imagination, genius, uh, disinterested joy, feeling. So these are the terms that he kind of, uh, consolidated, as it were, in philosophy. Now he says that there is a moral judgment. In this lecture, I will not be able to talk about much about that. Moral judgments are what he calls categorical imperative judgments, which are universal, etc. But I'll not go much in detail. There are cognitive judgments, epistemological judgments, and I talked in some depth about them since yesterday. But the judgments in art are judgments of taste. In Sanskrit, it is called abhiruchi. And in many Indian languages, it is termed abhiruchi. So when you judge something to be beautiful, and this part of my speech is very important because there are so many misconceptions about art. That art reveals the truth, that art gives you knowledge about the world, art exposes what was hidden, and so on and so forth. Kant categorically states that judgment of taste is not a cognitive judgment, that it is not either logical, analytical judgment or empirical judgment, does not give you any information. It's a purely aesthetic judgment. So, because it is talking about the pleasure of representation. And this pleasure of representation is not dependent upon, through the mediation of reason, on the object. So it is the flower in itself is neither beautiful nor ugly. Or the moon, the full moon or a crescent moon, or any beautiful man or beautiful woman, beautiful to your eye, are not qualities per se of that object, but they are the qualities which are properly ascribed to the imagination of the subject. It is the subject's state of being. It is the subject which finds that object to be beautiful. So the determining ground of aesthetic judgment is basically subjective. Normally, perception or representation is objective. I mean, of course, objectivity in the qualified sense that I've been insisting upon in the last two lectures. So they're basic, but they give you knowledge of the world, as it were. But feeling of pleasure at something or feeling of displeasure is subjective. It's a different kind of subjective. It does not mean that, for everybody there is a different kind of, standard of beauty. So, what is the sense of pleasure that I feel when I see something beautiful? It is, Kant says, and here becomes very attractive. He says that it is the name for the subject's vitality or feeling for life. So if I'm not basically interested in the world, if I'm morose, if I'm completely alienated from the world, and I hate this world, then I'm not going to find anything beautiful. It is my vitality. Even though I find the world extremely ugly, even though I find it very alienating, still I've not succumbed to that despair. And only when, your art may be very bleak art, your art may be very gloomy art, but the fact of art itself assumes that still something is ticking inside you, that you've not given up on everything, that nothing is, that you are not dead. So, pleasure here, the aesthetic pleasure, and aesthetic pleasure is different than sensory pleasure, is the name for subject's vitality or feeling for life. And this is the foundation for a new faculty that contributes nothing to knowledge. So there's no cognitive function to art. The onus of proving something, the onus of enlightening people is not art's task. It is the task of sciences. It is the task of social sciences or human sciences or natural sciences. But keep arts out of that role of educator. Arts, in a way, of course, arts have got certain educative function, but it is not so crass, it is not so directly functional. So, what does this aesthetic faculty do? It merely holds in the subject the given representation against the entire faculty of representation. I am quoting him. And the mind becomes aware of this in the feeling of its state, whether the constituents of the judgment are empirical, sensuous, or rational. The judgment itself is aesthetic. So it is just a kind of, experience, enjoyment of the kind of, representation against the backdrop of all other, the entire faculty of judgment. And here you are not even interested in whether the object that you find beautiful is real or is an apparition. It's just something that, you may imagine out there. Like, for example, little children imagine shapes in the clouds. Now, those shapes do not really exist. In the same way, whether that beauty is really there or not, whether the thing which possesses beauty is possessible or beyond your possession, whether you are going to see that beauty again or not, whether you can predict its appearance control its appearance or not. So all those kind of considerations which are consequent upon its existence are immaterial to the judgment of taste. So you're not interested in whether it is really there, whether it is yours, it is somebody else's. Like for example, you experience a piece of music. You can't possess a piece of music. It's everybody's. You read a poem. The experience of reading poem is yours, but the poem is not yours. Nobody can possess it, not even the poet who wrote it. There's no copyright. And copyright is something ludicrous when it comes to question of art, the commodification of art, buying and selling of paintings. I mean, the paintings which are bought and sold, which are kept under high security in museums or in private possessions, have already eloped, have already gone out in the market and are ready to be seen by everyone because they are humanity's estate, they are humanity's treasure. So you can't, really kind of talk about the thingness of art as an object of being, object of possession, or object of, uh, profit, or object of, control. Now, the feeling that you get is a subjective feeling. Try to understand this. You see a beautiful green color of fresh grass, green color of meadows. Now, this is an objective sensation. But whether you are going to feel pleasure, whether you are going to find it beautiful or not, has to be distinguished from. I mean, everybody is going to see green. I mean, if you ask a dud, a complete dumb person around you, with whom you are perhaps walking in the meadows, what do you see? He's going to answer something similar to what you are going to answer. He's going to say that, well, I see green grass, etc., etc. But at that time, he may be completely indifferent to it. He may be thinking of photosynthesis. He may be thinking of his cattle which can graze there. And you will be filled with the sense of beauty about it. You will be feeling that this is so heavenly, this is so beautiful. So, this sensation of greenness, the lusciousness, the wetness, the freshness of grass has to be distinguished from the pleasurable sensation, which is the aesthetic sensation. Now, this is a very subtle kind of move that Kant is making. And in this pleasurable sensation, there is only subjective sensation where nothing is represented. So, this is a kind of, in a way, a beginning of what does art provide you? First, it provides freedom to the imagination. Imagination is a faculty in the first critic which unites the data provided by sensations and supplies it to understanding so that understanding can operate upon it with the help of categories, with synthetic prepositions, with conditions of experience, and make sense of the data. Now, here, imagination does not have any cognitive purpose. And this is the secondary imagination that Coleridge is talking about. So, this imagination for Kant is completely free, and that's why art becomes so shocking, so surprising, so counterintuitive, so uncommonsensical, and so on. So the aesthetic faculty is basically means freedom, and one has to come back to it again and again, because where there is no freedom, there is no art. Freedom is the soul of art. So if you say that a particular character in drama can do this or not do this, as it recently happened in a drama school in Pune, then you are murdering art, the soul of art. Because art thrives or exists or is realized only through the freedom of imagination, where anything and everything has to be allowed. Anything and everything is possible. Things which are not possible, which are not natural, which are which may challenge the scientific dogma, which may challenge the moral dogma, the social mores, all those things are possible within art. A human being can be converted into a huge insect, as in Kafka's Metamorphosis. And you have to take it on its face value. You cannot, uh, call it a perverted fantasy like Marxist dogmatic thinker George Lukács did. So it is not a kind of, sickness of mind. There is no importation of the norms from other spheres to the sphere of art. Art is independent of all other human or natural kind of, world. It is not constrained by reason nor by needs for cognition. Now this feeling of freedom is in the play of images, and it is this freedom which offers you pleasure. The source of pleasure is the kind of, now, of course, freedom does not mean, sense of being immensely powerful. It is in a way a kind of a negative experience. It is an experience that I am not restrained by, I am not constrained by anything. So if I don't want to do anything, I just sit around, I'm free to do that. If I have to run around, gallop, I mean, this is what, for example, animals in animal farms do as their first reaction when human control is overthrown. They just run and gallop in the middle. So this sense of freedom is something which is most valuable because it ascertains that human vitality, that human spirit is not dead. Then it offers you this pleasurable feeling because you're free. Your sensibility is also free because it does not refer to the object but refers to the subject. And the more important point that I'm going to come to now is this aesthetic judgment of something being beautiful is universal, though it is not conceptual, though it is not logically binding, though it is not factual, still it is universal. Now, this is a kind of, the miraculous aspect of Kant. And here you have to kind of, have had experienced art. Like if you like a particular song, and if you truly like a song, not as a fashion, not because, you are in the same emotional state, If you appreciate a song for its melodiousness, for its harmony, for its beauty, for its poignancy, then you can be almost certain that any other person who listens to that song, any other normal human being who listens to that, who is not a pervert, who does not, look at things from spectacles of caste, creed, religion, country, race, or who is not, crass, commercially inclined person. So this song is going to appeal to anybody. A thing of beauty is universally appreciated. So you have to realize this. Now, this is not something that happens because of orthodoxy. This is not happens. This doesn't happen because because, like for example, in today's Marathi literary circle, it many times is seen that through parochial groupings, something is advanced as a great book when it is not. Lots of politics goes into it. Lots of uh, interests operate there, and obviously the time pushes all these things asunder, and you know reveals that they were just empty promises, that no true beauty was ever offered. But of course, that is being helpless, and but propaganda can certainly operate, whether it is communist propaganda, as in the period of Stalinism, or it is capitalist commercial propaganda as it happens around you. This propaganda can promote something as an object of beauty, but Kant is very optimistic, and he says that no, it is quite possible that such miscarriages of taste can happen, and yet the true beauty is going to shine forth. And it is its own appeal. It compels you to admit, it compels you to say, wow. It compels you to say, how beautiful, how true. So, this is a kind of, the raw innocence of aesthetics. I mean, Kant, who is such a otherwise, architectural thinker, I mean, he creates a kind of, foolproof system. Here in the third critic, he's so vulnerable, he's so innocent. He appeals to human taste. He appeals to the good faith of all those who love art. Uh, so there is a kind of, a very, what should I say, a law-like kind of specter type of law lawfulness in the area of beauty. Now he says that the compulsiveness or the force of aesthetic judgment comes because there is a miraculous unity of aesthetic judgment and judgment of reason. Like, for example, when you see a beautiful scenery in nature. Now, nature is obviously haphazard, nature is certainly contingent. Nobody has ordered a scene in front of you. And yet, in that morning or in that evening, you feel that everything has fallen in its right place. The moon is where the moon should be, the tree is there where the tree should be. The mountain is there where mountain should be. The herd of cattle is grazing where it should be. The shadows are exactly as long as they should be, and so on and so forth. The sun is setting in the most pleasant way possible. Now, there is a sense of purpose in it, there is a sense of order in it, though nobody has ordered it. And this miraculous kind of, harmoniousness is what, you know, and this is what you experience when it comes to beautiful poem or a novel, that each word had just occupied its own place. You could not have expressed it any better. The whole thing is balances itself so nicely, and so on and so forth. So there is a kind of, concord in the freedom of imagination. I mean, this is, how can there be concord when your imagination is free, and the lawfulness of reason, and that is the authority that arts have. Now, as I told you, that arts is a new faculty, taste is a new faculty. It does not contribute to knowledge. It is not interested in the existence of object, and so on and so forth. Now I think I've, crossed my time limit, and I'll stop now. There is so much to talk about Kant. Thousands of books have been written about almost each of his critique, each of his work in several languages. And he's a very important thinker. He's in a way the inaugurator of modern philosophy. It will not be an exaggeration to say that if Plato and Aristotle defined the boundaries of ancient philosophy, and Augustine and Aquinas defined the thought prevalent in medieval ages, then it is Kant and Hegel who set boundaries for modern thought. So they are the horizon within which we think, they are the horizon which we want to break through. And they are the long shadow that has been cast over us. We obviously are spontaneous, free thinking beings. We are not long going to be within this shadow. There are going to be new thinkers, there are going to be new thoughts, which are going to out Kant, out Hegel. And it's happening slowly and certainly. There have been, thinkers, huge mammoth thinkers such as Marx, Nietzsche, Freud, Heidegger, Husserl, Derrida, and this kind of, and yet we've got such strong thinkers who are providing insight into our lives, and yet one has to recollect Kant with affection, with gratitude for daring to think. As he himself says, what is enlightenment? He uses a Latin word, phrase, sapere aude, audacity to think what is unthinkable, to think without fear, to not desist, not resist thought because you are fearful, because you are afraid, because you are in thrall of somebody. So sapere aude, that is the message, that is enlightenment, that is modern man, the man who thinks fearlessly. So with these words, I conclude sapere aude. Thank you. Prakash, you are inaudible.
Okay, there are a couple of questions which I'm going to make it available on screen. Please respond them, sir.
Okay, Dilip has come with a bouncer and he asks, how did Kant influence Marx? Well, not directly, but it was Kant's love and obsession with freedom and Marx's observation that in capitalist society, no human being is free. Everybody is in chains. And we have to break these chains. We've got nothing to lose but our chains. So, this commitment to freedom is what Kant has bequeathed to Marx, I would say. And that is the first thing. And then, Kant's notion of a man who is both a biological natural being determined by laws, so material determination, and at the same time, the man who is capable of producing art, taking moral actions. So the sense of agency, for Kant, human being is not paralyzed. Human being is not, uh, is not a cog in the wheel. Human being is an agent, free agent, who can change his or her destiny. And that is what, again, something that Marx owes to Kant. Obviously, through the whole list of mediators such as Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, Feuerbach, and others. So this is what I would reply to Dilip's question. Well, here the question is, shall we relate the ideology of Immanuel Kant with the neo-functionalism theory rather than structural functional theory? I do not know what neo-functionalism theory is, just so much jargon to me. Neither do I know that what is structural functional theory. So both these jargons I'm unfamiliar with. I'm unable to answer this question. Thank you, sir.
Uh, for a reason, Dilip's answer may not be available here. To sum up, on the behalf of Department of English, Swami Ramantir Maratha University, Nanded, I would like to say thank you for being available for this wonderful guidance, and I hope you see you again. Thank you.